this is our family scale agriculture as a climate change solution presentation. And our agenda shows you we'll do some introductions. We're going to hit on a few topics, consolidation in the ag and food systems. This is a high fly overview, just so you know. Then we're going to talk about climate change and agriculture. We're going to share what we think is a great solution is that family scale agriculture on the landscape. And you can see a very interesting titled end there with the consolidated burger. So stay tuned to the end for that. Moving on to who's presenting, I am Erin Lenninger, and I am a conservation coordinator with Farmers Union and have been in that role for a year and a half, coming on 2 years. I work in the Conservation and Stewardship Department, also assisting in our membership department. You will also hear from Erin Thompson later on. She is our policy analyst, and she is now in the Governmental Relations Department. I'm very excited to present with her today. That's where we currently are, and we will share our contact information into the chat if you'd like to continue this conversation or talk about anything else too. All right, Wisconsin Farmers Union, some of you know us, some of you don't. We'll do a real quick introduction here. So on the next slide, we are the second largest general ag organization in the state. We've been around a long time. I will touch on that when we were founded. And we support small and medium-sized families throughout the state, and also the rural communities and sometimes urban communities that are supporting those ag and food systems. For the purposes of our organization and this presentation, we don't have an exact definition of small or medium or family. So we are really a big tent organization. As you can see, we represent a wide array of farm types and production and size. So we're going to refer to smaller family scale in this, but other organizations define those in different ways. And we are a grassroots organization led by local leaders that come together in local chapters. It's really great. You can check out our website to see who's near you, or maybe you're in it. We do organize at that local chapter level. And then we have a state organization, and then there is a national farmers union. All right, moving on. What are our core values here? This is really a triangle that we talk about a lot. We always have been based on this. We are cooperative, and we are supportive of cooperative structures. Again, where everyone has a voice, where the benefits and the power are spread to everybody and they don't concentrate into the few. We do legislation work, advocacy work. We are empowering people to make changes, to talk to the elected officials, and to support legislation that supports what our members desire, what they need, and what they want. We also are founded on education. This is at the youth level. We have a youth camp where kids can come and learn, and it's gorgeous. We also do adult education too. The chapters can say we want to learn about something, and we will pull together events, speakers, all that kind of thing. So this is our core. We haven't varied from it. We're going to continue doing this as we move forward. Excuse me, next slide. This is a stat. This is why we're needed, why we're here, and what we're advocating for. You can see that as recently as just 2022, that ag census out of the USDA shows us that we have the smallest number of farms on the landscape. And that data point, that next one, just in those 5 years from 2017 to 22, Wisconsin lost 10% of our farms. And you can see that that's concentrating into that dairy operation side. So I'm sure you know it, I'm sure you see it, but this is the reality and what we're advocating for. Sorry. So as I said, we are based on our members, and they're bringing us what their concerns and their needs are. We have a lot of policy. It's vast. You can check it out online or contact Erin. But we can see a lot of the areas overlap, and that's what we're showing just a little bit here, how things affect each other, our food systems, climate change, the conservation of land and water. You can see our agricultural consolidation on there, and then access to that food that we're growing. And when we talk about consolidation and concentration, the actions that we call for and what our governmental relations team is asking for are things like antitrust investigation and enforcement, appropriate oversight and communication, so we understand what's happening, limiting the foreign ownership of lands. When it comes to climate change, we're asking for research in the areas of emissions and our carbon footprints, and the adoption of climate smart practices that resonate with all the farmers on the land and are adequately supported for all the farmers. So that's a really brief overview of Farmers Union, but you can see that the consolidation is a piece of that policy, and that's what we're going to explore further today. So this is my section, and then we'll hand it to Erin afterwards. When we say consolidation, and you can go to the next slide, Erin, or big ag or concentration, lots of verbiage for it, what are we talking about? And we are not pointing fingers, or we're not talking about that really big farm in your county or in your region. We're not talking about the guy or gal who's got 1,000 acres or more. It's not that pinpointed, right? You can see here we're highlighting industries and broadening that out. So we have agribusiness. These are seed companies, equipment companies, chemical companies, right? These are all the businesses surrounding and supporting agriculture. It's not just the farmer on the land. We're also highlighting those food conglomerations, these huge food corporations. They're obviously tied into this. And then you can see we're also just mentioning here some of the land ownership and how those are concentrated, and the power and influence are really concentrated into those enterprises as well. So when we say big ag, I want you to make sure that that's sort of who we're speaking about. We're not pointing fingers at the farmer or landowner. Okay. Oh, sorry, that one had to click in. So who is this big ag? We're continuing to talk about that. Oh, I'm sorry, Erin. There are a few stats that point this out, and maybe you've seen this before. So again, in that equipment area, we have 95% of the large tractors that are made by 3 companies, right? I grew up in Iowa, near Waterloo. John Deere is a big one. If she clicks again, I think it's going to talk about pesticide and herbicide, right? It's just 4 firms are accounting for the majority of that market. They have control of that. And then another stat, again, 4 firms have the majority of our corn and corn and soy seeds. So they have the power, and they're determining a lot of what's happening in that space. So those are just some examples. If we think about how we got here, I like to take a step back into history. Has it always been this way? Of course not. So we're going to just step back and walk ourselves back up to where we currently are. Since time immemorial, we've had Indigenous First Nations on this land with foodways that cared for the earth and their people in reciprocal relationship, and it worked. Our settler colonialism time period comes in. We, of course, negatively impact those Indigenous foodways. A presentation for another time, but our settlers come in, these immigrant forefathers, they're growing on a small space, right? They're growing on what grew there. It's very place specific. You ate and you grew what you could on that land, that climate. You consumed it locally, you grew it locally. You really aren't moving much beyond that region. And this is a little bit lighter on the land. This is a little bit more close knit, right? It's a very supply driven food system. You can have what you can grow, or your neighbor can grow, right? There's trade and barter and all of that. And we could look around then and see many farms on the land. We had many, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but all throughout and supporting themselves and each other in that local food system. That they were diversified and there was biodiversity. And so our impacts, again, are just a little bit lighter. And then we didn't have hyper specialization. You know, maybe you got really good at growing apples where you were, right? But you were still growing other things. You didn't grow that only, which we see sometimes now. So just to put us a little bit in our ag history, in Wisconsin, we're very, very proud of our heritage in ag. I say we, I'm an adopted Wisconsin native, but you know, it runs a line through our pride here in the state. So I want to always remember that. If we start to move forward a little bit, we do grow. And so with that, we have to change. And so we see formations of things like National Farmers Union. So that's all the way back in 1902. And we see these cooperatives and these associations coming together to kind of have some economies of scale and a little bit more power and to reach this growing nation. You can see a lot is happening at this time. Like I said, this is a very quick sort of high fly. We have the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression period, and we can see this growth that we had, and we start to want to increase yield. We started to grow on more acres, monocropped it, and we had to see the impact on the land. Around this time, we do have in there that Wisconsin Farmers Union is founded around 1930. But we see this growth and then a negative impact on the land. This is negatively impacting those small family farms, of course, in so many ways. but they actually are devastated sort of economically, physically, as well. But there were people getting wealthier at that time, right? The wealthy were getting wealthier, but we see this disparity start to happen. And we lost so many. There's a great migration, right, out of those spaces. It was really sad. However, we responded in that time. In this time, and you can see there, this is also the time of the first Farm Bill, and they had a response in there to this environmental impact and this change in production. And so they create a soil conservation service, realizing that we have to take care of the land that's feeding us. It's vital, and that we can manage supply. We can manage the systems to make it so we don't overproduce and hurt the earth and ourselves in that way again. So I like to think of it as a great picture to look back on and see us responding in a positive way to something that was really, really negative. Okay, and the next slide, we continue to grow. Excuse me. Yeah, we continue to grow. We have a lot of innovation and change always. And so we see that we can now impact our systems a little bit better. We can package our food, we can preserve it, we can actually transport it and move it in ways we couldn't before. And this was great. It's progress and innovation. Let's use it. And so consolidation and this run on with the industry portion was really attractive. And it made it really possible. And so this is seen as a good thing, right? And we're plugging in all these systems that we're learning from elsewhere. If we go again, Erin, there. So we have a baby boom. So we come through the war. Everyone's happy. I mean, we're having babies, we're growing, right? There's a lot of people to feed. And that's both domestically here in the US, but also abroad. I'm not going to go into all the geopolitical influences at play, but we start to really want to increase our yield again because we have to do all of this. And no worries, we have chemicals that came out of war production that can help us. And we saw this helping farmers as decreasing our weed and our pest pressures. And they could do this with less labor, right? Again, progress. How wonderful. This is all seeming to be working. Now a family can get food because now we can transport and package from somewhere far away. We can have more access to more choices. You can see there's a picture of a grocery store. And so we're moved to a demand-driven food system. And again, this isn't seen negatively. This is convenience, right? It's helpful to the families, and it seems like a positive thing that we're moving towards. But it is gearing up our ag systems in a very particular way. Excuse me, next slide, Erin. So we keep moving along, and let's talk about the USDA, the Department of Agriculture. Many of you know this is a very large, very old, important department that we have here in this nation. It shapes a lot of our ag policy and practice, and also in our food systems as well. Some of you may recognize this guy. We have a Secretary of Ag, and in the early 70s, President Nixon appoints Earl Rusty Butz as Secretary of Ag. Okay, and he has a background in large ag firms. So with no surprise at all, he's aligning the department to those interests, right? And so even though after the Dust Bowl, we were managing supply to conserve resources, Earl really changes that around for us. And he says we need to increase supply. And let's get cheap food to the masses. In fact, some people refer to him as the patron saint of fast food nation. And he did a good job of it, didn't he? We live in that currently. You may recognize this quote, "Get big or get out." I still have people quote that to me, thinking that's the view of the USDA. It's just a very famous. He also said, "Plant fence post to fence post." Okay, so we say this switch. Now, this department is very powerful. If that's his angle, if that's what he's going for, you can see that then the programs that they enable will align with that. So access to capital and buying land when they're starting a farm business, when they get that. Our environmental programs and our conservation on working lands, that's coming through that program. So that's aligning more towards the large farms. They have subsidies, of course. We have insurance programs that are within this department. So during this time, as we're ramping up production, we're also aligning all of this access and resources to those same large farms. And then, excuse me, if we think about that as one layer, we of course have another layer that's running alongside this, and that's our systemic racism that has come through the history of the United States. And this was rampant in the USDA as well. Of course, I'm not going to go back through each of these things, but we have a slew of empty promises that are given from all the way back. You can see some from the Civil War times. A lot of these are empty promises. So they state something and then they just never deliver. Maybe they do give something. Maybe the land is not arable, it's not farmable. Sometimes it was given to white people instead of Black farmers. It's done badly in many different ways. So we move through that, and we're not building any trust. So those farmers of color aren't coming to the department at all. Sometimes there's physical violence, and sometimes that's done through just the policy, right? And there's barriers that are existing inherently in us, both individually and implicitly as well. So access to those things can be denied or have barriers at an individual level. So this is pretty dire, I know. We make some progress. We start to acknowledge that there have been some things not done well. We start to acknowledge that, and there is a decision that's made in the late 90s called Pigford versus Glickman, and this is a class action suit of discrimination with Black farmers through the USDA. So this is a decision that is somewhat helpful. Does it solve everything? No, of course not. We have lost a ton of land that was being farmed by farmers of color. And Erin, I think if you click, there's another, I probably put into, I forgot my animations. I can't read it, but in 2022, it has a stat about who's getting loans again. So this is not long ago, guys. 72% of white applicants were funded, I think, and 36%. So just to say, when we're talking about getting more small farms on the land or the rise of those large ones, right, there are so many layers of barriers that we run up against, kind of all laying there at the same time, affecting our ag landscape. Okay. I'm going kind of fast. I apologize. Okay, so our smaller farmers aren't getting the access to the capital and the resources that they could. They maybe don't trust to walk through that step anyway. But as we're ramping up this production, we see that even just the equipment, the inputs, the assets you need, the labor is really getting out of reach as we start to consolidate together and we have this specialization. There's just even more barriers to the knowledge of doing that or getting into there. Now, I also did want to say, as you start to, these farms get this size of equipment, right? They're consolidating, they need to get larger new equipment. They again are working with these consolidated companies, these enterprises that get to levy all kinds of limitations. Like you can have that big, large tractor, right? But you're not able to repair it anymore. Or here's your seed that you purchase and grow and tend all year long, but you can't keep the seed, right? There's these those agribusinesses that we spoke about in all of those different areas get to limit our farmers on what they're doing and really force them into a particular kind of production and business. So thinking about how people can take over a farm, right? Transition that farm or purchase land to start gets really, really tricky. And who's benefiting from it this way, right? Who's benefiting? And is this sustainable? I'm losing my voice. So this is very hard to see, I'm sure. This slide is just to say that when those large firms and those businesses and farms are getting larger, they can start to integrate. So vertically integrate, meaning why don't I just take control along that value chain, right? Earlier or beyond my farm. And so they start to amass more power when they do that. And then they can force all of the smaller farms and entities around that to now have to play in a system that has their prices or their logistics. And it just often is really very hard for them to do so. Again, another way of squeezing that small farmer. But again, we've course corrected before. I don't want this to sound too, Erin and I are very hopeful people, I promise. We want to keep a positive thread through this. So we can do something, right? But who has the power and influence? The second graph that you see is the rise of agribusiness and then political influence. And this is a graph of campaign contributions from agribusiness. So again, you can see with the example of just that Secretary of Ag and who's in a decision-making space, and how they can align things and push industry and push places where they want it to go. So who has the influence when we're trying to, you know, correct what's happening with our lands or get more small farmers on the landscape? How can we do that? Of course, all of us have power, right? We want to empower everybody, but we can see the influence of agribusiness and big ag. This is the graph, I think, goes from 1990 to 2020. Okay, next slide. So this brings us back to the core mission of Farmers Union again, right? We want to have any family, any person grow the food, fiber, and fuel that they want to, the way that they want to, if that's their calling, on the scale that they want to. So what is this consolidated agriculture's effect on that small scale farmer? There are many. As I said before, we're losing a lot of them off the landscape. Economically, it gets very difficult. Most farms have off-farm income. And there's a stat here. This is from the USDA Economic Research Service. And it says, depending on the operation, between 52 and 85% of those small family farms have operating profit margins identified as high risk. And I think most people would agree to that. It is risky. The second stat that I have there, again, is speaking to sort of who's actually benefiting from the policies that we have existing right now. And it says that small family farms represent 86% of all farms. That number's down, but it's still the majority. But they're getting 15% of the crop insurance payouts. Those aren't coming out to the small farm. So again, there's many directions we could take this. The effect is that it's hard. But again, I want to infuse hope with this because the small farmers I know are stubborn and smart, and they're doing the right thing. And there are people starting that they are trying. It is there. We just want more of them out there, right? If they can. Okay, my next slide and almost last slide is really, some of us are farmers and some of us are not. Erin, I think if you click again, there's just that one graphic that will come up. But we're all consumers. We're all in the system. We're all eaters, right? And we're parents and we're children. We get to have a voice in here. We do. And so, as we said, we've built a system where we have seemingly endless choice. And that can feel great, overwhelming for me often. But this is a good illustration. I know it's hard to see, but that actually when we seemingly exercise those choices on the many options that we have, if we can learn about where that's actually going, the influence, the power, the money is funneling to the very few still when we purchase from, say, these brands. This is one example. And then if you contrast that with a smaller local food system where you're buying from the farmer, and you can know where that impact is going, right? And the influence of that interaction. So we have that power. We can do this. And we have choice, and it is overwhelming, of course, but we are powerful people. Okay, I'm about done. My next slide is what we call the consolidated cookie or cookie maps. And I'm going to have Erin pop in and help me with this because she did most of the research on this. I'll take credit for the idea. We did this presentation very firstly to a group of students. We had a lot of time to kill. And I, of course, was like, we're bringing some food. So we're going to bring some local cookies. We thought, let's just dig into it. Let's just see where these cookies come from and then compare it to another cookie. So we picked an Oreo. Everyone knows it. It's been around a long time. The Oreo is a product of the consolidated system. This map might be hard to see. It is on mine too. I think the yellow is where they're sourcing the wheat. The blue is palm oil and the pink is chocolate, which makes sense, but you can see where they're getting these ingredients. And of course, chocolate, we're not growing that here. So we're all getting chocolate from those areas, right? But the wheat and the oil that goes into that cookie are also coming from quite a ways away because that's where those huge conglomerates are sourcing it. Now, the star is actually the production facility for the US market. So if you buy and eat a cookie, an Oreo in the Wisconsin, there's actually no part of that that is happening in our nation, in our almost continent. So just that influence, that impact, right? Thinking about it that way. Now we wanted to contrast that to another cookie that our students in Oshkosh could get at a bakery right down the road. Thunderbird Bakery makes chocolate chip cookies as well. And so this, if you can see, is a map of just Wisconsin. And the yellow is that it's spelt actually flour, and that is grown organically here in Wisconsin. It's milled in Wisconsin, and it comes all the way from a couple counties over to get up to Oshkosh. The blue is butter, I believe, and the pink is chocolate. And as we said, of course, that's not grown here, but she does source it from a local co-op that is nearby. And then there's many more ingredients we could have added. The eggs are local and things like that. She makes this choice very purposefully. And of course, there are some hardships to doing it that way. There's also benefits, like being insulated from global forces and things like when we experienced COVID and the supply chain issues. So we wanted to illustrate that with the kids, and it went over very well. We also, of course, brought the cookies for them. So that's a teaser for what you're going to see at the end of the presentation as well. We're going to do it with another food for us to explore. So that's the end of my little setup here. I'm going to hand it over to Erin to talk more about climate change and ag.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. That was, I think, a great background in consolidation. And so then, like the title of this presentation says, we need to bring in now climate change to this discussion. So I'm going to talk a little bit about climate change in agriculture, and then towards the end of the presentation, we'll tie those two topics together. Okay. So, like we learned from Erin, historically, the family farm landscape was significantly less intensive than what we see now. And there were a lot of main qualities that defined this landscape, and these are qualities of a less consolidated system. So we're seeing that, historically the family farm landscape has fewer inputs, fewer fertilizers. There's livestock was on the land. It was grass-based animal agriculture. The systems were diversified, so they were integrated crop livestock system. In a lot of situations, the farms grew or raised both. And there was just generally fewer food miles. And food stayed in the community where it was grown. Like Erin said, it was a supply-based food system, what was available at that time of year. So when agribusinesses aren't necessitating the use of certain products or practices, we can see a system emerge that makes more sense and works with nature rather than against it. And so historically, less land was used for agriculture as well. We can see in this statistic that between the 60s and 2020, agricultural land expanded by 7.5%. And it currently occupies 32% of the world's land area, which is pretty significant. Irrigated area has also more than doubled. And so tying this back to agribusiness again, an agricultural system that's dictated by big ag takes more space and more irrigation. So the point of this presentation is really to tie the rise of big agriculture and the rise of climate change together. We're saying they go hand in hand. And so they've paralleled each other over time. And so we really do need to consider, how does agriculture contribute to climate change? Here's some stats about agriculture's contribution to climate change. We can see related to emissions, it's significant. It's 21% of the world's carbon dioxide, 53% of methane, and 78% of nitrous oxide. And fertilizer production is a big part of that. It's responsible for about 5% of all global heat trapping emissions. And animal agriculture, as we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation, is also a significant source of methane and all kind of emissions generally. So when we look at the total US greenhouse gas emissions by sector, we see agriculture's fairly significant, about 10%. But I think, we're coming from a lens of consolidation on these statistics. And so I really don't think that these stats tell the full story. They tell the story of consolidation. Research on climate change often doesn't consider smaller farms, and there's a lot of data that's lacking on how they affect climate in general. Consolidation has also exacerbated climate change and pushed out small farms. And so these statistics may just be the story of consolidation. So we know the ag system contributes to climate change, but how is the fact that it's consolidated exacerbating agriculture's impact? And so we're looking at 4 key areas in which that's the case. So that'll be emissions, land use change, concentrated animal feeding operations, and increased inputs. So we see increased emissions under a consolidated system. There's increased inputs like fertilizer, which give off significant emissions when produced and used. There's automation and farm technology that's increasingly being used when the scale is very, very large. And like I mentioned before, we'll talk about intensive animal agriculture and that's impact on the environment. Land use change is a big deal in respect to its impacts on climate change. Under a consolidated system, we actually see reduced crop and non-crop biodiversity. We have a pretty significantly important study that points to this, which we'll talk about a little bit later. We also see deforestation and wetland draining, general intensification as far as land use, soil degradation, habitat loss, etc. And so, like I mentioned, pointing to this significant sort of study that this is how that we know that that's the case when we compare large farms and smaller farms. There's a recent analysis of global literature on sustainable ag that found that compared to large farms, small farms actually have higher yields per unit of land, greater crop diversity, and higher levels of non-crop biodiversity at the field scale and in the landscape. And so that's really significant. That tells us something about small farms that is maybe surprising when we're talking about yields, but also maybe not so surprising when we're talking about crop diversity and non-crop diversity. There's also the impact of confined animal feeding operations, also known as CAFOs. You may be already familiar. There can be air quality concerns, groundwater, manure, animal welfare, antibiotic resistance, and farm safety concerns. So when it comes to animal agriculture, we do see these climate impacts as well. And finally, like I mentioned before, under a consolidated system, there's this necessitated increased use of inputs. The agribusinesses are pushing the need for increased inputs, whether it's the type of seeds that are sold to the farmers or just the stripping of nutrients from the land that requires those increased inputs. And like I mentioned before, those emissions from fertilizer production are significant and highly impactful on the climate. So I think if you're going to take anything away from this presentation, I think it should be this, that consolidation doesn't just hurt farmers economically, it has environmental repercussions too. So let's get a little positive with this presentation. This is our favorite section. How can family scale agriculture be then a solution to climate change? We often tie, agriculture to its impacts on climate and how it contributes, but it can also act as a solution. And so part of that solution is breaking up agricultural monopolies. So when we bust up that big agricultural system, farms thrive. We see that impact on the land can be lessened. We empower individuals in their communities. They have greater agency as farmers that have access to local markets. General rural revitalization, when our farms are thriving, that's a great thing and has kind of a wave of impact past just the farm. And the farms enrich our local economies in many ways. When they're thriving, then the rest of us thrive as well. And so just to be clear, we're tying a lot of this back to history and the history of consolidation, like Erin talked about, but we are not really advocating for a return to subsistence farming. That, of course, is not realistic, but fairness for small farmers and mid-sized farmers is realistic, and that is what we're looking for. So I'm just bringing this back up because I think that it really, really relates to the fact that small farms are powerful. They're very, very powerful. And when we look at this study, we see, like I said before, that compared to large farms, smaller farms actually have higher yields per unit of land, greater crop diversity, and higher levels of non-crop diversity. And that tells us that they have the capacity to feed their communities given a fair shot. So diversity in agriculture and in our agricultural system really is our strength, because a diverse ag system serves all of us. So when farms flourish, our communities flourish. And we want to create a food system that's centered on, our responsible farms and local food system that drive positive impact into the local communities. We want to see improved economies, improved physical and mental well-being, which is really tied to our food and our sense of place. And then, of course, regional pride, because when we know our farmers and we know our food system, that gives us a sense of belonging in our communities. And I think another, really great point for the small and mid-sized farmers is their relative insulation from climate and market changes that those really large, food corporations, they don't have. When family farms thrive, we actually build resilience in the community and enhance food security. The small farms are selling to local markets, which can provide some insulation from global impacts and changes. So we heard that Erin said the USDA was really using the rhetoric of get big or get out. And I think that this presentation and the things that we're working towards pose the question of farms should be able to stay small and still succeed. So what's next in this conversation related to this topic of climate change and consolidation in agriculture? I think we really want to continue the conversation, and especially in solidifying the fact that antitrust enforcement, which is kind of the enforcement mechanism to a consolidated system, and food system work as well, is tied to climate and climate work. I cited some studies there throughout the presentation, but really more research is needed to solidify the connection between climate change and agricultural consolidation. And so that's a big point here. And then funding conservation programs, as well as seeing through antitrust enforcement, prioritizes family farms and food systems. And so as a point of solution, that's really what we would like to see as well. So lastly, we're going to do another little kind of walk through some ingredient sourcing for maybe a food product that you've eaten before, maybe not, maybe you're dead set against it. But like Erin mentioned, we are going to look at the Big Mac. So we're calling this the consolidated burger. And like we've kind of talked about this through this whole presentation, the consolidated supply chain, is very vertically integrated. And so it prioritizes volume and scale over, anything else. So I have a few just ingredients here that I did some sourcing research on, but I will kind of preface this by saying sourcing info is very secretive, and it's not always easy to find, and that can be on purpose. But they do often tout their smallest producers, which I think is interesting to consider. But if you go on the corporate McDonald's website, they're talking about some of the smallest producers that they work with. So they do point to sourcing lettuce from this farm specifically in California, which is a 4,000 acre vegetable operation, and doing a little bit more research about them. They are vertically integrated as well. And so from kind of seed to distribution, they actually own that whole supply chain for themselves. And so that gives them a lot more power as far as volume and scale. The beef is sourced mixed from Tyson Foods and Lopez Dorada. And so you can see where they have some meat packing plants, in the United States as well as Guatemala. The exact location of where they're sourcing their beef from is not necessarily clear. But I will say just an interesting point about this one, that Tyson and Lopez have what they call like partnership plants, where they actually work together to fund meat packing plants, which can help further their consolidation. So they're not, formally joined together as one company, but they are working together. And so that when I learned that, that made me think, the big guys are working together, and we should as well. Finally, the cheese is, this is actually an estimate. So this one, McDonald's does not have any transparent sourcing for where their cheese comes from, but Schreiber Foods does produce the majority of processed cheese for the global fast food market. And so that is why they're included in this diagram. Schreiber Foods is actually based in Green Bay. They have plants in the US as well as many, many, many other countries. And they specialize in processed cheese. McDonald's cheese is only 60% real cheese. So just adding that as a note. But as a company, they have $5 billion in sales, 7,000 employees, and they export to 55 countries. And most of their growth happens actually outside of the US. So this is the definition of a consolidated food product, really, just like we saw with the Oreos. So let's look at another example. This is Valley Burger Company, located in the Chippewa Valley area. And this is our local burger. And so when we're talking about a local supply chain, oftentimes it prioritizes the health and well-being of the community through strong partnerships and responsible farming practices. And so finding sourcing information for Valley Burger Company was very easy and extremely transparent. It's very well labeled on their website. Anybody can find this information, and they're very proud of who they're working with. Their lettuce and beef and cheese all come from Wisconsin and all come from fairly close to the Chippewa Valley area, which is really great. And they're kind of walking their values as an organization. So that's just some examples, the Oreo and the burger, some examples of kind of what we're talking about when we say, a consolidated food product versus not. And so I think, in this presentation, we just wanted to drive home the fact that these two topics are intrinsically linked and really should be worked on together. So thanks so much for being here for this presentation. It was, exciting to give it for you all, and we are happy to take some questions or discussion now.